Grandpa walked in on me in worn clothes with my newborn and said, "Wasn't $250,000 a month enough?" I had no idea what he meant. My grandfather has never been a man who shows up unannounced. In 29 years, he has called ahead every single time, even when he was just bringing groceries, even when he only lived 20 minutes away. So when he appeared in the doorway of my hospital room on day 3, no warning, no text, just suddenly there, I knew something was wrong before he even opened his mouth. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking at me. I was in the chair beside the bed, not the bed itself, because the bed hurt my back and the chair was closer to the bassinet. I was wearing the same gray shirt I'd worn since Tuesday. It had a formula stain on the left shoulder I hadn't noticed until just then, when I saw it through his eyes. My hair was pulled back with a rubber band I'd found in my bag, the kind that comes around broccoli. I hadn't slept more than 90 minutes at a stretch in 3 days. I knew I looked like it. His name is Edward Calloway. He's 77 years old and was raised by a man who believed that composure was the highest form of character. He ran a private equity firm in Savannah for 40 years. He has sat across tables from people trying to bankrupt him and never changed his expression. He is not a man whose chin trembles. His chin trembled just once. He locked it back down so fast I almost thought I'd imagined it. Then he crossed the room, pulled the visitor chair close to mine, and sat down in it like his legs had quietly remembered his age. He looked at my hands, at the chapping along my knuckles from the industrial soap they made us use at the cleaning company, at the paper bracelet still on my wrist from the hospital check-in, at the formula stain I was now very aware of. Wasn't $250,000 a month enough, he said. Quiet, careful, like he was diffusing something. I thought the exhaustion was making me hallucinate. What? The money? He said. I've been sending it every first of the month since your wedding, without fail. I wanted you to be comfortable, Eleanor. I wanted you to never have to worry. I stared at him. My daughter, Mara, was asleep against my chest. 3 days old, 7 pounds 11 ounces. Already the most important thing that had ever happened to me. She made a small sound in her sleep, like she was disagreeing with something in a dream. Grandpa, I said. My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. I have never seen a single dollar. The color left his face completely. He sat very still for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, found a contact, and pressed call. When the line picked up, he said 4 words. Get me Helen. Now. That was when everything I thought I knew about my life stopped being true. My name is Eleanor Whitfield. I'm 29 years old, and I grew up in my grandfather's house in Savannah after my parents died in a boating accident when I was 7. He raised me in a house with high ceilings and old oak floors and a housekeeper named Ruth who made biscuits every Sunday and called me baby girl until I was 22. Grandpa never called me baby girl. He called me Eleanor, always my full name, which I understood even as a child was his own form of respect. He didn't treat me like a burden. He treated me like someone he expected great things from, which is a different kind of pressure, but a better one. He has money. Old money. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't come with a boat or a second house in the Hamptons, but does come with a law firm on retainer and a financial advisor who has worked for the family since before I was born. He never discussed numbers with me directly. That wasn't how he operated. What he did instead, when I got married 2.5 years ago, was tell me that he was going to make sure I was taken care of, that I would never have to struggle, that he was proud of me, and that I should focus on building my life. I told him I didn't need his money. He said he knew that. He sent it anyway. I never saw it. I met Daniel Whitfield at a conference in Atlanta 3 years ago. He was consulting for a firm that had hired the nonprofit I worked for as a client. He was charming, funny, the kind of person who remembers exactly what you said 2 weeks ago and brings it up in a way that makes you feel like you'd said something worth remembering. He was good at making you feel seen. I understand now that this was deliberate. At the time, I just thought I'd gotten lucky. We dated for a year. He proposed on a Tuesday, which surprised me because I'd always assumed proposals happened on special occasions. He said he didn't want to wait for a special occasion. He said I was the special occasion. I thought that was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. Grandpa liked him. That mattered more than I admitted to myself at the time. The first year of our marriage felt mostly normal. There were frictions, the way there always are when two people start sharing a space and a life and a checking account. Daniel suggested early on that it would be simpler if he managed the finances, since he had more experience with investing and budgeting, and he genuinely seemed to enjoy that kind of thing. I had a background in nonprofit development. Numbers weren't my strength. It seemed like a reasonable division. I noticed things over time, small things. Our grocery budget kept shrinking while his wardrobe kept quietly expanding. We'd cancel plans with friends because of cost, and then I'd find a restaurant receipt in his jacket pocket for somewhere I'd never been. I asked about it once, and he explained it was a client dinner, expensed, no big deal. I believed him because believing him was easier than the alternative. I got pregnant at the 18-month mark. We hadn't planned it, but we weren't preventing it either. And when I showed Daniel the test, he held me for a long time without speaking, which I took as happiness. Things got tighter financially after that. I told myself that was normal. A baby costs money. Life adjusts. I started doing more mental math, tracking what we spent on groceries, on gas, on the electric bill, the way you do when you're anxious about a number you can't quite see. At 6 months pregnant, I picked up a part-time cleaning job. 2 overnight shifts a week at an office building downtown, 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. I told myself it was temporary. I didn't tell Grandpa because I was ashamed. I thought it was our problem to solve. I thought asking him for help meant admitting I couldn't manage, and I was so determined to prove that I could manage. Daniel knew about the cleaning job. He said I was incredible. He brought me tea before shifts and kissed my forehead and told me he was proud of me. Somewhere, in an account I had no knowledge of, there was $7.5 million with his name on it. I didn't know that yet. The things I noticed slowly. The way you notice a leak in the ceiling. First a small stain, then a bigger one. Then one morning you realize the whole corner is soft. Around month 5 of my pregnancy, Daniel started having more business dinners. 3-4 nights a week. He'd come home late smelling like wine and good restaurants and mention names I didn't recognize. Clients, partners, people he was building relationships with. I didn't question it. He was ambitious, and his ambition had always seemed like a quality, not a warning sign. His mother, Sandra, started dropping by more. She lived 45 minutes away and had recently, she said, decided to work on being more present in her son's life. She had opinions about our house delivered in the tone of helpful suggestions. She reorganized our kitchen once while I was at a prenatal appointment and presented it as a gift. She and Daniel had long phone calls that he took in the other room. When I asked what they talked about, he said family stuff, shrugged it off, changed the subject. At 7 months pregnant, Daniel went to Scottsdale for a golf weekend with colleagues. I didn't go because I was exhausted and the trip sounded expensive, and he said it was a networking thing, nothing I'd enjoy. He sent photos. A resort, a pool, a dinner table with candles, and a bottle of wine I later looked up and found cost $280. He was smiling in every photo, relaxed and easy in the way of someone whose world is going exactly as planned. I was home that weekend in our apartment doing math in my head about whether we could afford the birthing class the hospital recommended. The night Mara was born, Daniel was in the room. He held my hand and said the right things. He cried when she arrived, or something that looked like crying. He held her for 20 minutes and took photos and texted people and seemed, in every visible way, like a man who had just become a father and understood what that meant. On day 2, Grandpa came. He held Mara for a long time without speaking. Then he looked at me, at my clothes, at my hands, and asked his question, and everything rearranged. The door opened and Daniel walked in 20 minutes later. He had Sandra with him. They were laughing about something, mid-sentence, the ease of people who'd had a good day. Sandra had shopping bags, 3 of them, handles looped over her wrist, tissue paper at the top. Daniel had one more. They were already talking when they registered Grandpa's presence, and the talking stopped as if someone had cut a wire. "Edward," Sandra said. Her voice went careful. "What a lovely surprise." Grandpa didn't look at her. He was looking at Daniel. "Daniel," he said. Just his name, nothing else. The way a door closes before a storm. Daniel set his bag down. His smile was still there, but it was doing something complicated, trying to hold its shape against information that was threatening to rearrange it. "Edward, hey, I didn't realize you were stopping by. Where has the money gone?" Grandpa said. The room went completely quiet. Mara, who had been making small restless sounds for the last few minutes, stopped, as if even she understood that something enormous was happening. Daniel blinked. "What money?" "Don't." Grandpa's voice was quiet, precise, the voice of someone who has never needed to raise it to be understood. "Every payment went into a joint household account, an account your name appeared on as primary manager, an account my granddaughter has told me she has never accessed." Daniel looked at me for the first time. I looked back. "It's complicated," he said. "Financially, the market. The last 18 months have been 2.5 years," I said. My voice sounded far away, like it was coming from another room. 2.5 years of transfers. $250,000 a month. I did the math out loud because I needed to hear it land somewhere outside my own head. "That's more than $7 million, Daniel." The number sat in the room like a physical object nobody wanted to touch. "You told me we were tight," I said. "I took a cleaning job. 6 months pregnant. I cried on the phone to a billing department because we were $200 short on a medical bill. I told Grandpa I couldn't visit because I couldn't afford the drive. I borrowed maternity clothes from a coworker because I told myself it wasn't worth buying things I'd only wear for a few months." He was very still. "And you were sitting on $7 million. Something crossed his face. Not guilt. Something worse. The expression of someone running numbers, calculating exits, deciding which version of the story still has a viable path. "You don't understand what it takes to build what I'm building," he said. "The contacts, the positioning. You can't do this work from a position of visible struggle. There's an image to maintain." "Whose image?" I said. Sandra stepped forward. She had the posture of someone who has decided that a strong offense is the only available defense. "Daniel's career requires investment. His network, his client relationships, the opportunities he's cultivating. His opportunities," Grandpa said quietly in that boardroom voice, "are about to become significantly less relevant." Sandra's composure cracked at the edges. Her voice went high and tight. "Edward, please, you don't understand the full picture. He has investors, partners, people counting on him. If you do this, you'll destroy destroy everything he's worked for. Grandpa looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. He robbed his pregnant wife, he said. He can keep whatever survives that. She let go. We were in Grandpa's house by 10 that night. My old bedroom was exactly as I'd left it when I got married. The same quilt, the same lamp, the same window with a view of the magnolia tree. I sat on the edge of the bed with Mara on my chest and felt the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something enormous for a very long time without knowing it had a name. The next morning, Grandpa introduced me to Helen Marsh. Helen was 54, silver-haired, and had been the family's lead attorney for 12 years. She wore dark suits and spoke in complete sentences that left no room for ambiguity. She had a law degree from Georgetown and had, I was told later, a particular reputation for financial abuse cases, specifically for the thoroughness with which she dismantled the other side's position before they understood what was happening. She sat across from me at the dining room table with a folder that was thicker than I expected. "Tell me everything," she said. "From the beginning. Don't summarize." I talked for 45 minutes. She took notes without looking up, asked 4 questions. When I finished, she said, "Good. Now let me show you what we already know." She opened the folder. Wire transfer records going back to the week after our wedding. Every payment from Grandpa's account into the joint household account, timestamped, documented, and then, within 48 hours of each deposit, transfers out. Partial amounts, different destinations. Hard to track if you weren't looking carefully. Moving into a private account at a bank in Delaware. Daniel's name only. No secondary holder. No joint access. We identified it 8 days ago, Helen said, when your grandfather noticed the payment confirmations weren't including the usual acknowledgement receipts and called me. She turned a page. There's also a secondary offshore account, Channel Islands. Approximately $900,000 moved there over 14 months. The number hit like a second impact after the first had already knocked the air out. She kept going. Credit card records. Sandra Whitfield listed as an authorized user on one of Daniel's private accounts. $9,400 in 1 month. Hotels, restaurants, a boutique in Charlotte, 2 spa receipts, a weekend trip to Asheville in October. October was when I was 7 months pregnant, and Daniel told me we needed to cut our grocery budget by 30%. Then she reached the last item in the folder. "This," she said, "is the piece that makes everything else easier." She placed a printed transcript on the table between us. A conversation, time-stamped, pulled from the cloud backup of Sandra's home assistant device. The smart speaker in her kitchen had recorded it automatically and backed it up to the account. Daniel's voice, then Sandra's, then Daniel's again. She doesn't check anything. Never has. Old Edward does the transfers and considers it done. As long as we keep everything structured the way it is, she'll never think to look. And if she does look, she won't. But if she does, she'll come to me first. She always comes to me first. I read it twice. My hands were flat on the table and I was focusing on keeping them that way. "Are you all right?" Helen asked. "Keep going," I said. She told me the plan. Financial fraud under Georgia statute, civil theft, domestic financial abuse. They would file simultaneously on 3 fronts. At the same moment the papers were served, her office would issue a press release to financial news wires because Daniel had, she informed me, closed a significant investor deal the previous week. A real estate development group out of Atlanta. $2.8 million committed with a second tranche pending. Those investors, Helen said, have a right to know who they're in business with. Will the transcript hold up? I asked. The transcript alone would be sufficient. The financial records are redundant at this point in the best possible way. The offshore account is going to generate a separate federal conversation that we're not filing, but that call has already been made. She closed the folder. By tomorrow afternoon, she said, Daniel's phone will not stop ringing. And for the first time in 2.5 years, you won't have a prepared answer for any of it. That night, I sat in Grandpa's kitchen at 2 a.m. with Mara in the bassinet beside me and a cup of tea that had gone cold and thought about who I had been 6 months ago. Mopping floors at midnight and feeling proud of my own resilience. Feeling grateful for the extra shifts. Telling myself that struggle was temporary, that we were just in a tight season, that it would even out. I thought about the way shame operates. How it moves into you sideways and makes the problem feel like yours to solve. Makes you feel like asking for help is an admission of failure. How I had been so determined not to seem like I couldn't handle things that I had handled things that were never mine to handle at all. It wasn't resilience. I understand that now. It was being deceived so completely and so consistently that I had no framework for seeing it clearly. Daniel called 11 times that night. I watched his name appear and disappear on my screen and felt not anger, not yet, mostly just an immense bone-deep exhaustion. He was still calling the next morning when Helen texted me at 9:04 a.m., filed and served. I put my phone down and looked at Mara's fingers wrapped around my thumb and felt something shift very quietly somewhere in my chest. Sandra called at 9:51. I held the phone away from my ear and watched Mara's eyelashes until it went to voicemail. Helen texted again at 10:22. Lead investor pausing pending tranches pending review. $2.8 million on hold. At 11:15, a business journalist at the Savannah Morning News called Grandpa directly. He had received the press release and had questions. Grandpa referred him to Helen, who was, I learned later, simultaneously on a call with a reporter at the Atlanta Business Chronicle. At 12:38, Daniel's name appeared on my screen again. again. I watched it ring, then I turned it face down and made more tea. The weeks after had the quality of a landscape after a storm. Still strange, everything slightly rearranged. I was recovering from childbirth and a marriage at the same time, which is a specific kind of exhaustion that I don't think has a proper name. Daniel cycled through approaches in a way that would have seemed almost methodical if it hadn't been my life he was cycling through. First came the calls and texts, apologetic, then explanatory, then justifying, then eventually something closer to accusatory. You're letting your grandfather manipulate you. You're not thinking clearly. You don't understand what I was building. I read them the way you read a forecast for a city you no longer live in. Informative, not personal. His lawyer sent letters. Helen sent them back each time with additional documentation attached, which I understood was her way of demonstrating that we had considerably more material than they'd anticipated, and she was enjoying revealing it incrementally. Then Daniel made the mistake that changed everything's temperature. He attended an industry dinner, the kind of black tie event where the charitable component is approximately 20% of the evening and the networking is 80%. He stood up in front of roughly 180 people, including 4 of Grandpa's longtime business associates, and said that I had experienced a severe postpartum episode that had caused me to make irrational decisions, that I had removed his daughter from their home without cause, and that I had been manipulated by an elderly relative with a controlling personality. 180 people. Among them, 2 women who sat on the board of a foundation Grandpa had donated to for 30 years, a retired judge who had known the family since before I was born, the managing partner of a firm that had done business with Grandpa for 2 decades. By 8 a.m. the next morning, I had 9 voicemails. People I had met only briefly at Grandpa's gatherings over the years. People I had always perceived as pleasantly distant were calling to say they had heard what Daniel said and wanted me to know that they were available, to testify if needed, to speak to character, to help in whatever way would be useful. The 9th voicemail was from a woman named Margaret Calloway, 78 years old, who had known my grandfather for 35 years and had, it emerged, a long and specifically curated opinion about men who lie about their wives in rooms full of witnesses. Tell your attorney to call me, she said. I have a memory like a filing system and more connections than I've ever had an excuse to use. I've been waiting for the right occasion. I played that one for Helen, who listened to the whole thing and then said quietly, "Good, you know her?" Margaret Calloway has been on the board of 2 of the most significant charitable organizations in this region for 25 years. She has a relationship with every journalist, donor, and civic leader in a 150-mile radius. Helen opened a new document. Daniel just made a very serious miscalculation about his audience. The defamation filing was added that afternoon. The emergency hearing was 19 days after Mara was born. Small courtroom, wood-paneled, the kind of room that processes human damage at scale without losing its procedural calm. The judge was a woman named Diane Okafor, who had been on the bench for 14 years and had, according to Helen, a well-documented impatience for financial abuse cases where the evidence was clear and the defendant had chosen to perform confidence rather than demonstrate remorse. Helen presented 14 exhibits: wire records, account documentation, the Delaware account, the Channel Islands account, the credit card statements, the transcript. Daniel's attorney objected 3 times. The judge sustained none of them. The order was granted. The judge also said something from the bench that Helen told me later was unusual. Judges tend toward procedural language. What she said instead was that the record demonstrated a sustained and calculated pattern of financial control that had caused demonstrable harm, and that the court found the documentation both comprehensive and troubling. Daniel didn't look at me when we filed out. I had not expected him to, but I noted it anyway. The newspaper piece ran on a Friday. Careful, sourced, specific. It named the Delaware account. It named the offshore account. It quoted 2 investors who had withdrawn. It included a statement from Helen and a 4-sentence statement from Daniel's attorney that said, in substance, nothing. By the following Monday, it had been picked up by 3 regional outlets and a national financial aggregator. Daniel's firm had 6 employees. Within 2 weeks, 4 had quietly found other positions. Sandra called twice more. The first I let go to voicemail. The message was long and oscillated between fury and something adjacent to pleading, which told me she understood that the transcript had damaged her own position considerably. The second call I answered, not because I had anything to say to her, but because I wanted to know whether she would apologize or press forward. She pressed forward, told me I was tearing apart a good man, told me I owed it to Mara to reconsider. You were on the card, Sandra, I said. The account funded by money that was supposed to pay our electric bill. She hung up. 4 months after the hearing, I was sitting on Grandpa's back porch on a Sunday morning with Mara in my lap and coffee going cold on the railing, and Grandpa came out and sat in the chair next to mine. We watched the yard for a while, the way the light came through the magnolia, a bird doing something purposeful in the bird bath. I want to say something, he said. I looked at him. I structured it wrong from the beginning. I should have put the account in your name alone. I trusted him because you trusted him, and I used your judgment as a proxy for my own. That was a failure of mine, Eleanor. Grandpa, let me finish. He was looking at the yard. I told myself the money was a gift to your marriage rather than to you specifically. I told myself joint management was how marriages worked and that I didn't need to look more closely. I told myself a great many things that were mostly excuses not to ask harder questions. He paused. I'm sorry. For the cleaning job, for the grocery bills, for every moment you sat with that weight and believed it was yours to carry alone. My throat went tight. I didn't know, I said. I know you didn't. That was what made it work. He looked at me finally. He needed both of us not to look. We sat with that for a while. Helen says the civil recovery is solid. I offered eventually. It is. The domestic accounts, the offshore recovery, the federal piece running parallel. You'll see most of it within 18 months, she thinks. He picked up his coffee. The defamation case is moving toward trial because Daniel has apparently decided he can still salvage something. Gerald, his attorney, called Helen last week about a settlement. She said no. She did. He paused. She said discovery would be considerably more valuable than a settlement at this stage. Gerald apparently did not argue the point for very long. The piece had mentioned the dinner speech. Daniel's remaining professional network had largely dissolved in the weeks following publication. The real estate group had not only pulled their funding, but filed a separate civil complaint, which added a second exposure front. The federal investigation was moving on its own timeline. His firm had dissolved. He was living, as of the most recent legal correspondence, in a short-term rental and had requested a modification to the protective order for supervised visitation with Mara. Helen's counter-proposal included conditions she described as reasonable if he's serious and diagnostic if he isn't. I didn't hate him. That surprised me more than anything else. I had expected the revelation to burn, to leave something hot and clarifying I could move through. What it left instead was something more like the lifting of a weight I'd carried long enough to stop feeling it as weight. The absence of something I hadn't known was there. I thought about the woman who had mopped office floors at midnight and felt capable and efficient, who had apologized to her grandfather for not visiting, who had calculated grocery totals in her head and checkout lines and called it being careful. She wasn't foolish. She was deceived by someone who had studied her trust the way you study something you intend to use. That distinction took time to hold on to properly, but I held on to it. 5 months after Helen slid that transcript across the table, I signed a lease on a small house 2 blocks from Grandpa's. A yard, a kitchen with good morning light, a room for Mara that I painted myself on a Saturday while Grandpa sat in a folding chair in the doorway and pretended he was supervising. I went back to work part-time. Non-profit development, the career I had quietly set aside when Daniel suggested I focus on the home. I'm rebuilding it on my own schedule. Mara is 5 months old. She has Grandpa's eyes, gray and deliberate, and she has already worked out that sustained eye contact will eventually cause him to make a complete fool of himself, attempting to make her smile. She is correct about this. I don't think about Daniel every day anymore. Some weeks I barely think about him at all, which is itself a kind of recovery. Helen sends updates when there are updates. The federal investigation is ongoing. The civil recovery is on track. The defamation case is moving toward trial because Daniel, true to his nature, believes he can still win something. The last thing I heard from him directly was a voicemail 3 months ago. He wanted me to know he had made mistakes, that he had always loved me, that he hoped, for Mara's sake, I could find a way toward forgiveness. It was very carefully constructed. I could hear the effort in it. I saved it, not for myself, for Mara, so that when she is old enough to have questions about her father, she can hear what he sounded like when he was performing accountability and decide for herself what weight to give it. That is the thing about men like Daniel. They always believe the next version of themselves will be the one that finally works. He said on that recording Sandra's smart speaker captured that I always came to him first. He was right for 2.5 years. But the thing about always is that it only takes once to become a lie. And I had a grandfather who knew the right 4 words to say into a phone. That was enough. Thanks for watching video.